everyone, welcome back to Lou from Mabel's Closet. I'm Jane. So today's video is a fairly quick one, a little tutorial on how I use the stitch width on my sewing machine to set the seam allowance. So if you're interested in learning this really super simple trick, please stay tuned. So hi, welcome back. I'm just literally perched on my seat here because one of my cats is literally sprawled out behind me. So I'm on 2 inches of chair as per normal. So yeah, so I found this super easy method of setting my seam allowance on my machine a while back. I think I mentioned it in one of my previous vlogs and I promised I would show you how I do mine. Really simple, honestly, it's a game changer. I was forever putting washi tape on the needle plate to set my seam allowance because the little guide on my needle plate is not that clear to see, and when you've got your fabric going along on the needle guide, on the needle plate, you can't always see if you're lining it upright. And this method that I now use is as I said before, a total game changer. What you do is you use your stitch width on your machine. It's not just for zigzag stitch, oh no, because that's what I thought it was for. It literally moves the needle for you as well. So it doesn't. So if you keep your stitch length set and you change your stitch width, it will still stitch straight for you, but it moves the needle across as well. So you can place the edge of your foot on the edge of your fabric, and depending on what you set your stitch width at, it will set certain seam allowances. I know, I bet you can't wait. So I'm going to go over to my machine, show you exactly what I mean. It's super easy. I'm sure all sewing machines will be the same stitch width. I can't see them being any different because a stitch width is a stitch width. And we'll all be whizzing around on our sewing machines after the end of this tutorial, and you'll never need to get your ruler out or your washi tape or one of those magnets again. So stay tuned. I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and show you exactly how I do it. Right, so I'm at my machine, and as you can see, I've got my needle plate, and it does have, I'll take the fabric off, it does have markings at the back. There's a 5/8 of an inch, and there's an inch and centimetres, 2 centimetres and what have you. But as I say, when you've got your fabric on and you're whizzing along, you can't always see, well, you can't see the 5/8 because that's hidden by fabric, so you don't know it, you don't know where you're at. So I used to measure my centimetre on my plate, put some washi tape on, or you know those magnetic seam allowance markers that you stick on the plate, but they would never stay still, and I was forever getting my ruler out, measuring up where the centimetre was. Oh, nuisance. But now, super easy. What you do is you go to your stitch width. Now I know it's not just for zigzag, I know, but I'm sure they'll be the same in all machines. You go to your stitch width, which this is mine here, and you adjust that depending on your seam allowance. So I've wrote a little bit of a cheat sheet for me. I just put it at the back of my machine, and I just refer to this because I haven't got a very good memory. I do have them set into the memory of my machine as well, but it's just as easy for me to just quickly glance at this and just keep it at the back of my machine. And these are the stitch widths which will give me my seam allowances. So stitch width, if I set my stitch width to 0, it gives me 1/2 inch. 2/0 gives me 3/8 of an inch, 5.5 gives me 1/4 of an inch, 7 gives me 3/16 of an inch, and the needle plate I use a needle plate guide which is right at the front here, that one there for my 5/8 of an inch, so I use that one, but it's not very often I use 5/8 of an inch. I like to use a centimetre. So what you do is I'll just keep my So what you do is you obviously have your normal foot and you have your fabric. So let me just get a fresh side. So you place your foot on the edge of your fabric. So for example, if you wanted to do a centimetre seam allowance, I would then just watch the needle as I move my setting on my machine to 2. So I'm just going to move my needle to my stitch width rather to 2. And as you see, that needle moved over slightly to the right. So I'll do that again. So it's set at 0 at the moment. So if I just pop it to 0, and you can see it's moved over slightly to the right. And now that is set at 1 centimetre with my foot against the edge of my fabric. So let's just test it out. And just to prove it, let's just get my ruler so you can see there is my 1 centimetre seam allowance, and that's accurate all the time, purely by putting my foot on the edge of the fabric and setting my stitch width to 2. So for example, if I wanted to do 1/4 of an inch, it would go to 5.5. So I'm just going to move my dial to 5.5. And obviously your dial could be a manual dial, depending which machine you've got, but it'll still be the same stitch width. So my stitch width is now 5.5. My stitch length remains the same, so we're not going to touch that, and just leave it at 2.5 because that's what I stitch at. And I will now put my needle, my foot back along the edge of the fabric again. Or you can line it up against the, the previous row of stitching if you needed to line it up for that. It's whatever you line your edge of your foot up will be the seam allowance. But obviously seam allowances are generally because you're sewing 2 pieces of fabric together. So you obviously would have your foot at the edge of the fabric. Let's just see what 5.5 stitch width gives me. It should be 1/4 of an inch. And let's just get my ruler and just to prove a point. And you can see it is 1/4 of an inch. I mean, how good is that? Just purely changing your stitch width and putting your foot against the edge of the fabric. So let's do one more. So my trusty guide. My trusty guide says let's do 1/2 an inch. So 1/2 an inch, it's 0, 0. So I'll set my width to 0, 0. I'm going to put my foot against the edge of that sewing line. It's the same difference, just to show you the actual width of that from the needle to the edge of the foot should give me 1/2 an inch. So I'll just line up my footer with that previous row of stitching. Let's get my ruler. Run out of cotton, but never mind, I managed to do a little bit. So let's just put my ruler up against a little bit of the stitching that I managed to get done. Line up with the stitching against the previous row, and as you can see, it is well, let's line up properly. As you can see, it's 1/2 an inch. And that's all I do. Super easy, but the majority of my sewing is obviously a centimetre. And for 1.5 centimetres, 5/8 of an inch, I use my guide on my needle plate, and I just pop my fabric against that guide with my stitch width at 0, and I use my guide, and that will give me my 1.5 centimetres. I don't put my foot against the edge on that one. I use the guide for the fabric. But apart from that, for all the other seam allowances, centimetre seam allowance, maybe 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, I think it's a game changer. So that's how easy that is. Seriously, it's a game changer for me. I just use that all the time, that system, placing my foot against the edge of my fabric or the edge of a stitching line or whatever I need to use it for, and set the stitch width on the machine. No more rulers, no more washi tape or magnets that never stay put. So I hope I've enlightened you, and you will now go to your sewing machines and set your stitch widths using the stitch width, because surely that is what it's for. Because that's all I ever used it for beforehand, the zigzag stitch. So clearly it was meant for other things. So hopefully I've helped you. Hopefully you will now go to your machine and have a play about and test your settings. All you have to do is set your stitch width with the edge of your sewing foot on the edge of your fabric until you get the seam allowance that you need. Make a note of it like I did, or stick it into the memory of your machine. I've got mine in the memory of my machine, but I just find it just as easy just to have a piece of cardboard at the back of the machine, and I just refer to that as well. So a thumbs up if you enjoyed today's video. I hope it's been helpful for you. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to follow along with me. And as usual, as I always say, please take care and happy sewing, and let me know in the box below how you get on. Until the next time, please take care and happy sewing.